This is a moment of real significance for our country. We arrive here with a bill that is stronger and, above all, worthy of those who fought for it. A law that will always carry their name, the Hillsborough Law.
It truly is a rewiring of the state and a passing of power from the authorities to the hands of ordinary people. Yeah. And it is happening because of the Prime Minister's commitment to a country based on justice and fairness, and we thank him for that. Yeah.
Today is the moment the new PM started to tell us who he is and what he's all about. The Hillsborough Law, a model for his vision of making power in Westminster more responsive to people up and down the land.
This bill advances all of these just causes, and the campaign for truth and justice does not stop here. Indeed, it accelerates from here. I hope it ends the cover-up culture that has failed so many ordinary people in this country. We can never forget that for 20 years, an entire English city was crying injustice correctly, and yet this place ignored them for all of that time.
He name-checked the families of the Grenfell Tower disaster, a series of medical scandals, and promised to listen. It was a speech of less than 7 minutes, but it was Andy Burnham's first Commons outing since he returned here, and it gave us a smidgen of an insight into how the Hillsborough disaster shaped his political thinking. It all began here.
We can at least pledge that 96 fellow football supporters who died will never be forgotten. And he asks us to think at this time
"17 years ago, Burnham was Culture Secretary when he was heckled at a memorial service on the 20th anniversary of Britain's worst sporting tragedy. He heard the decades of anguish, families who wanted the truth. What they got was an establishment cover-up. Burnham says this was when he started to fall out of love with Westminster, embarking on a long campaign to help the families in their fight for justice.
And I say to everybody in government, we need the full Hillsborough Law, the real Hillsborough Law. That's what people are waiting for.
But while Burnham's allies are talking up his role in pushing that long-delayed law, the outgoing PM, remember him, is accused of rushing to get this bill into the Commons today to form the centrepiece of his legacy.
This is not just a bill for the 97, although it is that. It is a bill for every single working person in this country. Because, let's face it,
terrorism policing are with them.
To this. Time and again, the cry for justice was ignored by the British state because of who the victims are. Because they're working class. Because they're black. Because they're women and girls.
His soon-to-be successor paid tribute to Starmer, who managed to smile in response.
And it is happening because of the Prime Minister's commitment to a country based on justice and fairness, and we thank him for that. Yeah. He has honoured his commitment to the Hillsborough families, and what this House will do in passing this bill tonight is rebalancing the scales of justice so that we have justice for ordinary people going forward, and that, Madam Deputy Speaker, is some legacy indeed.
For one man, the end, for the other, a new beginning. And in those Commons exchanges, the strained smile from the current PM, the nerves from his successor, we all witnessed the handover, the bloodless coup taking effect. Well, welcome to Tuesday's show. So, in the last hour, Andy Burnham has stood up and given his first speech in the Commons since returning to Westminster as an MP last month. The next Prime Minister recalled how he'd worked with the current, soon-to-be-departed Prime Minister way back in 2016 at the conclusion of the second Hillsborough inquest. Back then, Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer were part of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow team, with the pair drafting what was the original Hillsborough Law, legislation requiring officials to be transparent during investigations into failures of the state. Tonight, as the legislation passes through the Commons, Andy Burnham said it felt like life was coming full circle as he praised Starmer for his commitment to the issue. This truly is, he said, his legacy. Well, Labour peer Baroness Ayesha Hazarika and former Conservative Cabinet Minister, now editor of The Spectator, Lord Michael Gove, are on the sofa tonight. Ayesha, it was fascinating watching those exchanges and, you know, the sort of tensions and so on between Andy Burnham and Keir Starmer sort of played out in the Commons. Just reflect on that first and then we'll talk about the substance of the law.
I thought it was actually quite poignant that it was almost like these two men were sort of passing the baton from one to the other, and it was this legislation, this Hillsborough legislation, which has been, you know, a huge touchstone issue for both men, actually. You know, Andy Burnham and seeing that footage there, you know, he's not some sort of Johnny-come-lately to this. He's somebody who's cared very deeply and very personally. He's been very personally affected by this. You know, Steve Rotherham is a great friend of his. He's another mayor. In fact, Steve Rotherham was there on the day. It's something they feel very keenly. They can touch this tragedy. It's very close to them. And Keir Starmer, to be fair to him and to give him his credit, has done a huge amount to get this. And my understanding is behind the scenes today, Keir Starmer, Richard Hermer, the Attorney General, were doing a lot of last-minute kind of negotiations, particularly to make sure the security services were happy in terms of how all of that aspect's going to sort of work. So in a way, I feel this is very poignant. This is a really Labour piece of legislation. This is something that people across the Labour movement feel very, very, very moved by in terms of that tragedy and what it represented and how power works or doesn't work for people in this country, and to mention the other tragedies. So in a way, I think the phrase you used was very apt. This bloodless coup, which of course has been very difficult for Keir Starmer and, you know, quite extraordinary for Andy Burnham. But if there was going to be one kind of, I suppose, totemic issue in which the two men would come together, this is sort of the perfect Labour policy.
Come together and get apart. I mean, is it a good law, Michael? Does it, this duty of candour on public officials, will it do what Andy Burnham wants it to do? You know, it's part of this vision, he says, of transferring power out of Westminster, making it more accountable to the people who have campaigned for this for years.
I think it now is. I think that Ayesha is right, that it has both enormous symbolic significance and it speaks to be fair, both the heart of Keir Starmer and Andy Burnham's politics. So whatever else one says about Keir Starmer, one of the reasons that he's in politics is that he believes that working people have been overlooked and undervalued. It's part of his own life experience and certainly that of his father and his siblings. And so he sees in this legislation, at last, a step forward in making sure that voices that have been marginalised and an arrogant establishment that has thought that it could have its own way when mistakes have been made, at last the balance can be reset. And that is very close to Andy Burnham's approach to this issue. Of course, there's an additional emotional level in Andy Burnham's case because, as Ayesha points out, he is a fan of the other principal team in Liverpool, Everton. He's strongly associated with the fight for justice. He had that sympathy beforehand, but as we heard, there was an epiphany moment when he realised that even the steps that he was taking when he was in government last time weren't enough. So it matters to both of them. But there was a concern, and a legitimate one, about whether or not people from the intelligence and security services who keep us safe might be compelled to reveal secrets about how they do so. I don't know the detail, but it certainly appears to be the case that a satisfactory compromise has been reached.
Right, so I was going to, you took the words right out of my mouth. You think the compromise, as far as we understand it, has been sufficient?
Yeah, my understanding, the compromise is that information which is germane to any sort of investigation like this will be revealed to the inquiry, but it may not be disclosed to the public on grounds of national
closed
security.
session sort of thing. Does that satisfy you, Michael?
Yes, well, in a way, I trust the people who are in charge of SIS, MI6, and MI5. In particular, I have a very high regard for the guy who's in charge of MI5 at the moment, a guy called Ken MacDonald. If he is happy, then that is enough for me.
And just, it was really interesting seeing the body language of Andy Burnham. He was very nervous when he started his speech, and he then sort of warmed up into this quite passionate, justification for what he, it's just sketching out his vision, really, isn't it? We've only really we've had that one speech which was quite vague. This was really, we're getting closer to the essence of what he wants to do in power.
I'm not sure if that's correct. Look, we don't know what Andy Burnham is going to do, and there's so much fevered speculation all across, this is summer reception season. Every party you go to, people are like, what have you heard policy-wise? Who have you heard? Who's going to be the Chancellor? The reality is none of us know. They're keeping it very close to their chest. And I think that's the right thing to do. It would be mad to let this stuff sort of leak. But I think what we saw in that speech today, a bit like we saw this in the speech on devolution a couple of weeks ago, is that there are some issues which are real touchstone issues for him. Clearly, devolution is one of them. This is another part of his story. And I think what you could tell from Labour MPs, and look, there's real cautious optimism in the Labour Party at the moment amongst MPs. It does feel like people are sad for Keir Starmer, but it does feel like there's been a bit of a weight lifted. And I think one of the things is that Andy Burnham tells stories. He tells political stories. So we saw the devolution speech. That was a story about kind of giving power away from Westminster. Today, the story is about grave injustice. It's about a system that doesn't work for people.
But they're sort of related, aren't they? That, Westminster has had this power, and the establishment, as Michael was describing, he's not using it for the people.
It's not just... I would say the thing that he's talking about today is not just Westminster, because there have been scandals that have happened all across the country. I mean, look at the...
Yeah, but my point is that the people have campaigned, whether it's Grenfell or Prima Dos, which he mentioned, medical scandals, he name-checked. People have campaigned, and power in the centre has not listened.
Yeah, but also I suppose the point I'm just challenging on that, it's not all London in terms of, look at the grooming gang scandal. That was happening actually around a lot of the patches that he's kind of represented in terms of... So this is But what he does politically, which would be different, I think, from Keir Starmer and others, is that Labour has so struggled to tell a story and craft a narrative around what it's doing. And you can tell he's somebody... And look, he may well get criticism for this later down the track. He's trying to paint in primary colours and tell a political story. And that is something that Labour has really lacked for a long time. It feels like whenever you've had a Labour politician trying to tell a story, it's just been a listicle of kind of random things, whereas he's trying to weave a story. Maybe it might be a bit folksy for some people, but that's the story he's trying to tell.
Right? Yes.
We're much more to come in a second on this, but let's just go now to John Craig, our chief political correspondent, who's just been speaking to Mr Burnham over in Parliament. John, what did he have to say?
Well, he's been meeting some of the bereaved families, led by Margaret Aspinall, of course, who you remember at that Labour Party conference appeared with Sir Keir Starmer. Margaret Aspinall said just now she was proud to be in the House of Commons when this bill got its passed through the House of Commons. I can tell you that the bill is due to be introduced in the House of Lords tomorrow, I'm told. Not debated, though, until when Parliament's back first week in September, so that's the 1st of September. Mr Burnham, I was asking Mr Burnham about the fact that he talked about so many different scandals during that speech, and he was saying that, yes, there's this culture of cover-ups. He was saying the same police force that was guilty of a cover-up over Hillsborough, South Yorkshire, was guilty of the same over the Orgreave picket line disturbances and during the miners' strike. But I thought it was really interesting during his speech. As you've said, Cathy, he looked a bit nervous to start with, and he finally got going. And he mentioned all those different injustices, scandals, if you like, Grenfell, Prima Dos, something Sky News has covered at great length. Talked about the mesh scandal, PIP implants, the Chinook helicopter crash, and the Horizon post office scandal. So he sees this very much as he puts it, an end to the cover-up culture, and as a breakthrough, really, in some of these other scandals that have been lingering and infected blood, all those sort of medical scandals that we hear about so often. So this could be a change of culture. That's obviously what Mr Burnham hopes, and obviously he seems determined to drive it through. as I say, he's just been meeting the families who were up in the gallery. They met the Prime Minister, the outgoing Prime Minister, earlier in the Downing Street garden. So Mr Burnham's got his first speech in Parliament after his absence for, 9 years under his belt. He got a terrific reception from Labour MPs, as you might expect. It was interesting, though, the Tories right till the bitter end were putting forward amendments trying to water down the legislation, heavily defeated, though. And the third reading went through on the nod, and the bill now goes to the House of Lords.
John, thanks very much for that. Michael, I wonder, when you look at the sort of what you're sketching out of a Burnham premiership, and as Ayesha says, we don't really know what he's going to do. Do you feel that the optimism of Labour MPs is misplaced, or do you think he's going to be a roaring success?
I think it's uncertain. I was at a reception that
You've all been to these receptions, haven't you?
It's hard work. And on this occasion, actually, it was a pleasure because it was the Tony Blair Institute reception. I went along there. I was about to say there were only two Tories there, me and Tony Blair. I was chatting to someone who'd worked in the past for Labour leaders, and he said, at the moment, we're in a position where people are asking the same questions of Andy as they asked of Gordon Brown. Will it be continuity or change? Will he be new Labour, or is he going to repudiate it? And there are signs for everyone who wants to say, oh, well, look, he's got James Pennell, the archetypal new Labour cabinet minister. And then someone else can say, yes, but he's got this very talented economist Miata Fanbula, who's very much on the left.
It's a kind of Rorschach test, isn't it, if I've said that correctly?
Exactly. and the key question there is that if you're on the runway towards becoming Prime Minister, there's a virtue, A, in keeping people guessing, and B, in keeping people happy until you've actually got the Ming vase in your hands, as it were. But, as Ayesha pointed out, as soon as he chooses his Chancellor, that will be a key indication.
Yeah.
And what you can't do in government, and this is one of Keir Starmer's failures, is to say, well, on public service reform in health, I'm going to be New Labour, and in education, I'm definitely not, because that just leads to static and interference in delivery.
There's a bit of grumbling in the ranks, aren't there, about the whole jobs thing, about what people want and what people have been promised and people haven't heard. Josh Simons isn't going to be in the administration, that kind of thing. Gave up his seat for him.
I think that is just to be expected. Look, there's that phrase that when the herd moves, well, they absolutely stampeded to be in that selfie with Andy Burnham. Many people who'd literally hours before been going, there's, Keir Starmer should definitely carry on being Prime Minister. So look, everybody, and that is the nature of politics, it's, the greasy pole, everyone is kind of jostling for position. But I do think, I'm speaking to somebody very, very senior in the party today, a real kind of grandee who's normally knows everything. And they were just saying, nobody knows anything. They're not giving out hints. They're not giving out signals. It's we're just going to have to wait for the red smoke to come out on Monday or Tuesday or whenever it happens.
Right, well, lots more to come. We're going to be talking about Iran next.
I don't think anybody should be able to charge a fee for the Strait.
Well, after a night of attacks by the US on Iranian targets, this afternoon Donald Trump dropped the threatened 20% tariffs that he'd proposed for US protection of the Strait of Hormuz. In a post on Truth Social, the president said overnight highly productive discussions with Middle East leaders had led to tariffs being replaced by massive trade and investment deals with Gulf states. He was speaking a little earlier as he met Iraq's Prime Minister.
I was called by different people, different countries, kings and emirs and all of the people that we all know and we all love, and they've been very strong partners. And they said, we'd love to do it a different way. We'd love to invest in the United States with billions and billions of dollars and continue our record setting, because there's never been a time like this with the United States, with the factories, with the plants, with everything else. And we would like to invest tremendously in the United States, as opposed to charging a fee. And I like that, actually, because I don't think anybody should be able to charge a fee for the Strait.
Well, a little earlier, I spoke to retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the former commander of the US Army Europe. Lieutenant General, Donald Trump has dropped the levy that he'd vowed to, impose on the Strait of Hormuz after allies were absolutely furious. Is there a sense in which they've realised now that they can stand up to him, and get him to back down?
I certainly hope so, but I also hope that his own team and the Congress would stand up to him. I mean, Secretary Rubio, the vice president, others had said this was illegal. Even Trump had said we don't want to have tolls. So it was, I think, nonsensical, a non-starter, that somehow the United States was going to levy a toll or a fee on anybody using the strait. So I think somebody fortunately got to him and said, this is not going to work.
Do you think there's a moment here that Trump can see his own weakness, or is that, maybe that's not something that he's capable of doing, but there's a sense in which the world is sort of a bit of an emperor's new clothes moment, is there?
I think more and more leaders around the world are finally realizing that they have to, that the flattery and the constant rolling over for him never works in the end for anybody. And so, look, the United States needs strong allies. And that means not only strong in terms of defense and economy, but also, leaders who are resolute. It doesn't benefit the United States when our allies are not strong and resolute. Now, the president may be unhappy about certain things, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad for the United States.
There's a lesson there, isn't there? We've got a new Prime Minister coming in, and I'm sure you're aware. What would be your message to him about how to handle Trump on all of this?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's the responsibility of every head of government to protect their people and protect their strategic interests. And so that's obviously his first responsibility, as he'll already know. But I would also say, take a long-term view of the relationship with the United States. This relationship goes back centuries. We depend on each other for intelligence sharing, for all sorts of other aspects of deterrence and defense. We have so many common interests. So I hope that the incoming Prime Minister and also British citizens don't give up on us, even though we're going through I would say, a very challenging time right now.
Just looking at Iran, when you look at all of Donald Trump's war aims, whether it was regime change or whether it was missiles, uranium enrichment, he hasn't met a single one of those war aims, has he? Do you think he realises, if he's honest with himself, the folly of what he's done?
Well, of course, it does. Let me say first, I don't know that he fully realizes all that. He probably does. But he's not helped by the fact that he picked people all around him who are very reluctant to stand up to him or to give him the bad news that, Mr. President, that's illegal, or Mr. President, we are failing here, or Mr. President, this is not going to work. We need allies, or Mr. President, of course the Iranians will shut down the strait if we attack. We have to be prepared for that possibility. I don't know how much of that he gets or how much he listens to that. He's always said, he trusts his gut. He knows more than anybody's intelligence agencies or whatever. But to the way you set up that question, none of the objectives have been accomplished. Now, of course, the U.S. Navy and Air Force and the Israeli Defense Forces have destroyed enormous amounts of Iran's military capabilities, but that almost doesn't matter, because the strait is still, in effect, closed, even though the Secretary Hegseth has bragged about all the Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the sea. It doesn't matter because of the effect that they're still able to achieve. And so I think, Cathy, part of the problem was that they never did get the objective right to begin with. I mean, we heard a series of justifications. It started with helping the protesters, for example, no nuclear weapon, destroy their ability to help Hezbollah or the Houthis, for example. None of these things have been finished. And by the way, opening the strait was not one of those initial objectives because it was already open.
How do you think this ends then, this situation?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I think this is going to go on either in its current form or something like this for an extended period of time. I think that the president, they do realize, I mean, they're in kind of a box now, and that they don't have all the cards, he loves to say. They don't have so much leverage over the Iranians. There's not much help coming from any allies because, they didn't sort that part out before they started this. And even amongst the Gulf states, what used to be actually a pretty well organized and close sort of relationships, that is splintering now with various Gulf states going their own way. So I think that in the long run, we're going to see, I think, some spikes like the last 3 days, and then there'll be a lull because the president also wants to avoid having to go to the Congress to ask for permission. So, I think he said July the 7th was the start of a resumption of the war. So in their mind, the administration, they see this as another 60-day clock. And I would predict that we'll see another sort of ceasefire or something before that 60 days, so he doesn't have to go to the Congress and ask for basically authority to continue doing it.
Well, Ayesha, Hazarika and Michael Gove are on the sofa tonight. Michael, is this whole sort of hoo-ha over the tariffs and
yes.
Trump, is it a question of taco, Trump always chickens out? Or is it that, some of his allies have stood up to him and said, this is a mad idea, what are you doing?
I think both. I think that Trump defenders, I don't know how many of them there are left, would say that part of his maverick negotiating technique is to make an outrageous or provocative feint, knowing that people will react with horror, and then he can settle for something which is what he wanted all along. And so they would argue that what he really wanted was a recognition from the Gulf states were America's allies, that it's American blood and treasure that is being deployed in order to keep the strait open. I think a more conventional president might have thought better of trying to rip up America's decades-long commitment to freedom of navigation.
Yeah. Very diplomatically put. I mean, it's basically a disaster, isn't it?
Well, it's not... The thing with Trump is that...
Just say it.
Yes.
Yes.
The thing with Trump is that...
He's too neocon to say it.
No, is that different standards apply. I'm trying to recognise that there is an obligation on all public service broadcasters like Sky in order to ensure that all views are represented.
You're not going to become ambassador.
No, I'm not. There's no way. However...
Yeah, is this because you want...
No, the whole thing has been... Look, the whole execution of the war has been... a Horlicks, to use a technical military term. And what Trump is trying to do at the moment is to save face, knowing that the upper hand lies with Iran.
Yeah, and what's the way out of this, Ayesha?
There is no way out of it. I mean, I just cannot bear all of the sort of, trying to kind of lionise people bending over backwards, clever people trying to bend over backwards to sort of portray
Me too.
Donald Trump as some kind of strategic genius. This whole thing has been a catastrophe from start to finish. Anybody with half a brain cell, and Michael and I have spent a little bit of time thinking about military things recently.
We have. For Sky.
For Sky, coming soon. The idea that he did not game plan the Strait of Hormuz just from a point of strategic importance. Look, when he went into this conflict with Iran, the whole thing was the advantage that Iran had over the rest of the world was their nuclear program. Well, he, through his idiocy and through his capriciousness, has basically awarded and gifted Iran the best strategic advantage they could ever have, which is geography, which is the Strait of Hormuz. If he wanted to go in and do serious, work on Iran, and by the way, I am no fan of that wicked, despicable regime. I'm very glad the government has just prescribed the IRGC, but he should have literally got his warships in a row. They should have literally mobilised.
Or be prepared to send in ground troops, which he clearly wasn't.
Absolutely, which he didn't. And you know what? This conflict, which is now, we are in Groundhog Day, we're having the same conversation again and again and again.
Yeah, and it's going to just carry on. I mean, it might not necessarily be technically a forever war because, they're not going to be at war non-stop, but it will be a sort of like attritional thing where...
Well, quite. No, the difficulty that that Trump has is, I mean, again, today he's retreated from a position, but the position almost legitimizes the idea that it's okay to charge a toll on the Strait of Hormuz. It's almost as though he said, you know, rather than being in a position of high principle, he's accepted the Iranian sort of premise. But more than that, the challenge is that the ability of the United States and its allies to keep a lid on Iran's nuclear program, as long as this regime stays in place, will depend on continual military presence and the potential of future intervention as well.
But so have people like you respond to Ayesha's jibe that people with more than one brain cell have got to start standing up to Trump? You didn't quite say that, but I'm just
paraphrasing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Would you accept that the likes of you and other people with more than one brain cell have to do that?
Yeah, I think that there is a balance, but yes. Funnily enough, my position, I mentioned him earlier, is Tony Blair's position, which is that there is a prior bias in favour of helping America because it's America, irrespective of who's president, is integral to our defence. And you might think that's completely misguided and we shouldn't be in that position. That's my prior position, but that doesn't mean that even though you will be predisposed to give America the benefit of the doubt, that you need to endorse every twist and turn. Nobody, I mean, you no matter how many brain cells they have, would be able to endorse everything that not even Donald Trump can endorse every position he's taken.
And
he might have a go.
And look, we are going to get to a stage with American politics, even on the Republican side now, where people are going to start distancing themselves.
Yes.
And you can see J.D. Vance has been quite careful and quite cautious in terms of what he said about this. And let's not make any, let's not, beat around the bush about this. This war is potentially going to be the most economic, consequential war of our lifetimes in terms of the damage it will do to all of us as citizens in Western democracies and democracies across the world.
Yeah, although I suppose there is a very small silver lining, isn't there, that people will find ways to cut Iran out of the equation, cut the Strait out of the equation, take a different route, more renewables, faster.
But Cathy, that is going to take a long, long time, and it is going to make, millions of people poorer. Millions of people.
But
the energy
in the
crisis. Run. In the what? 50, 60 years down the track. I'm really sorry. There's going to come a point, and we will see it in the midterms in America as well. You mark my words, we will see it in the midterms. This is going to have big. This is already having big economic consequences. People's mortgages are going up in this country. Inflation is going up. Energy prices are going up. Energy.
It's a disaster.
Inflation is the enemy of us all, right? In terms of
Ayesha Hazarika for Chancellor.
Yeah, there's a thought. Stay with us, because Andy Burnham has just made an intervention about MPs' security in the light of the killing of Anne Widdecombe. We'll find out what he's had to say in a moment. Anne Widdecombe was killed in a targeted attack, counter-terrorism police revealed today. Lawrence Taylor, head of counter-terrorism policing, said that both an appearance she made on Talk TV the morning she died, as well as whether hatred of her views or of the Reform UK party were factors and now lines of inquiry.
As we confirmed yesterday, Counter-Terrorism South East are now leading the investigation into the death of Anne Widdecombe. This is due to new information and evidence coming to light following the arrest of a 28-year-old man on Saturday in South Yorkshire. I know there will be lots of questions about what that new information is, but this is a live investigation, so I'm limited on the details that I can give. However, it is clear that this was a targeted attack. We are still working to understand the extent of any planning or preparation and the motivation that sits behind that attack. And I do not want to comment further on this at this stage of our inquiries. Extensive searches have taken place at an address in Rotherham, and scenes remain in place as that activity continues. We have also been granted a warrant of further detention, which means the suspect can now be held for questioning for up to 7 days under the Terrorism Act. He remains under arrest on suspicion of commission, preparation or instigation of acts of terrorism, as well as on suspicion of murder.
Well, in the last few seconds, we've had an interview with Andy Burnham given to broadcasters. Given we haven't heard from him much, and he'll be Prime Minister next Monday, we'll play the whole thing. And it starts off with him being asked about Anne Widdecombe. Let's take a listen.
First of all, on the death of Anne Widdecombe, you're returning to politics after Westminster politics after 10 years away. Why do you think that frontline politics, public life, seems to have become so dangerous for serving and former politicians?
Well, I notice quite a lot of change in the building behind me with 10 years away, but no more so than on the question of security. And actually I was quite shocked to see how much security now has to be in place, and even so it may need to be increased further. Politics has darkened in the last decade. There's no getting away from that. It's obviously appalling what happened to Anne. I knew Anne over many years in the House, and we would get along, and everybody would get along, but it feels as though something has changed. It's easy to blame social media, but it feels like it's having some impact in just building that kind of toxicity that's around the political debate. It's not one for easy, glib answers, and politicians need, in some ways, to be better and therefore deal, with the concerns of the public, and fix politics in many ways to make sure that it's answering people's concerns. But I do think we need now a serious review of MPs' security. I certainly am prepared to do that. I don't think we need to, if you like, take MPs completely away, because that could make matters even worse. But I think we do have to deal with the reality of the situation that we are in. And obviously, we support the police with all the resources they need to bring Anne's killer to justice, and we think of her friends and family at this time.
And then just finally, we've not had lots of you in recent weeks since you became an MP. There'll be lots of members of the public, lots of MPs perhaps wondering a bit about who you are, what your plans might be. Can you give us a flavour of what your priorities will be in the next few weeks?
Well, I think they know who I am. I've obviously been out and about as Mayor of Greater Manchester in the last 10 years. Obviously, was in the by-election, and I think there was obviously a big moment there, a big democratic moment in relation to that campaign. I've been setting out plans that I believe will bring some much-needed change in terms of people's everyday living expense. I think that is the issue of our times. If we want to connect politics better with people, well, let's deal with some of the pressures people are under in terms of the everyday cost of transport, the bills that they're paying. I heard it so often on doorsteps in the campaign, people saying, well, I can't have a night out anymore, or I can't take the kids anywhere or go on a holiday. Life has changed for people, and it's not necessarily got better. And I think we just need to be relentlessly focused on that. I have talked about more public control of the basics, and then through that control, cutting the cost. I did that with buses in Greater Manchester, and I carry that same principle forward. To me, the cost of living and reducing it is everything, and I think we need to regain the confidence of the public that we've got a credible plan to do that and make life better for them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, Harry.
The soon-to-be Prime Minister there, Ayesha Hazarika, Tip for Chancellor by Michael Gove, sitting next to her, are still with me. We'll come back to where Andy Burnham ended up on, his priorities and who he is, what he represents. But let's talk about that serious review he's promising of MPs' security, the idea that politics has darkened. Your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with him. I mean, I think many of us who met Anne Widdecombe are just still reeling from what happened. I had the chance to get to know her doing many sort of TV panel shows, and I honestly cannot believe how horrific this whole thing is. And also, I can't believe how horrific some of the reaction has been that I've seen online, particularly, I'd say, from people on my wing of politics. People more on the left of politics. I didn't agree with everything, and particularly on issues like abortion. She and I had very, very different views. But, I just can't. I find it so utterly depressing that that's where our sort of politics have got to, where people, and also what's so tragic, I think, as well. She was tiny. She was a small, older woman. And the other great thing that I've been thinking about a lot is she was very dear friends with David Amos.
Well,
and you just think there is a horrible, horrible. You know, the idea that that's happened. Yeah, it's so awful.
And Michael, I mean, Harvey Ali, who killed Sir David Amos, also had you in his sights. And, and there was actually a court case, you know, where you were involved in all of that. I mean, how did that... Were you terrified at the time?
I only discovered, and my family only discovered, after Sir David was killed, through forensic examination of the killer's phone, that he'd been outside my family home on 6 occasions. That he had intended either to kick the door down or to kill me when I was out walking or jogging. He was travelling with a knife. He was also outside my wife's place of work, ex-wife's place of work, once. It was quite horrific to discover that rather than... I mean, it sounds terrible to say this, rather than the random death threats, which are now a currency of politicians. You know, there are so many people, particularly but not exclusively high-profile female politicians, who get death threats every day from, you know, all sorts of horrible and disturbed people. This was someone who actually went on to kill in the most horrific circumstances. The one thing that it does prompt me to think, though, is that it is difficult to provide the level of security for everyone in public life that we quite rightly provide to the Prime Minister and to leaders of political parties. And there are also other people in our country and in our society, as well as politicians, who can attract the attention of the malicious and the and terrorists.
But I'll come back to, you know, what protections should be put in place.
Sure.
I just want to come back to your personal... I just... Did that haunt you for years afterwards? What was the impact on you and your family?
Well, my ex-wife, Sarah, has written about it in a book that she's written about what it's like to be married to a politician and married to politics. And it was not the only example of the horrific impinging on our life. Sarah's written about the fact that my daughter received a birthday card which was a direct threat to my life from loyalist terrorists in Northern Ireland. And it was also the case on a couple of occasions that crowds converged on me when I was in public because of, you know, the way in which politics sometimes operates. And the challenge, I think, is more for the family than the politician.
But do you feel you're looking over your shoulder even now?
No, I don't.
Why is that? What?
Personally, I think that there will be malign and there will be disturbed individuals out there. But I think it's partly that you know in politics that you, in order to achieve anything, you will encounter opposition, and it's better to believe that the opposition you encounter should be met with as much civility and grace as possible than to retreat and to hide and not to stand up for that in which you believe. And the other thing also is that, in a way, I felt that these, you know, it was unfortunate, but it was far more a problem and a challenge and difficult for my family. The other thing also is I'm conscious that the daily tirade of insults, and indeed worse, that women in politics have to endure is worse than what most men have to.
Well, Ayesha, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, Michael, quite sanguine, really, about it. A lot of female politicians are actually quite terrified, aren't they?
They're really, really terrified, and it sadly feels now like if you're anyone in public life or you're in politics, but particularly if you're a woman, I myself have just had horrendous experiences, particularly on social media, a lot of it with a misogynistic, racist, Islamophobic, but with a real violence, like not just horrible comments, with real violence associated with it.
And I've talked about similarly.
And you've had it as well.
I think it's important to talk about it because otherwise people don't realise what what is a routine thing. And, you know, Penny Mordaunt was saying on my radio show last week, you know, she has hundreds of threats that she has to report to the police.
And I think you make a really important point because, look, Michael is right. You know, you've got to sort of be tough in politics or if you've got a public profile like you have, and you have to think, right, this slightly comes with the territory and you're not going to be cowed.
Just crack on with the job.
Exactly. But I do also think it's really important for us to be honest about the effect it does have on you and your family and how shocking it can be. And when you have had thousands of messages about how people want to, like, hurt you or attack you or rape you or whatever, that does have an effect. And I think there's the personal effect, but then the effects it has on democracy, I think, is really important.
Yes.
Well, it is having a chilling effect. I think it's making people censor themselves. It's making people not say things. It's making a lot of people withdraw from the public space in terms of communicating.
Yeah,
and I do
coming off X, for
absolutely.
example.
I've come
but
off
isn't it
X.
interesting how Andy Burnham and some of his allies as well, Lucy Powell was on the sofa saying a similar thing. They're really going for the tech companies, and I wonder whether that's reflecting public opinion.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. You know, tech has brought many wonderful things, but we are going to look back, I think, on this period of time in terms of what this absolute kind of, you know, sort of this explosion of unregulated, unfettered social media has done to young people. It's done to our mental health. It's done to polarisation. By the way, a lot of the hate that you see on social media, some of it is also being organised by foreign actors to cause division in this country.
Better move on. Coverage of the Widdicombe case, of course, and its political implications will feature heavily on our late-night programme, The Wrap, tonight from 10 p.m. Joining Anna Botting to discuss all of today's big stories and the best of tomorrow's papers will be the Labour peer and former Shadow Cabinet Minister, Baroness Debonair, and the former Conservative Cabinet Minister, Michelle Donlan. Well, Ayesha and Michael are still here. We saw Andy Burnham there talking about his priorities, who he is, and so on. Cost of living is obviously top of his agenda. Is he going to be able to make a difference, you know, in a way that Keir Starmer hasn't?
Well, he's going to have to, right? I think this is literally going to be the absolute germane issue for people. We've touched upon it when we're talking about the Strait of Hormuz. For many people in this country now, for a long time, life is just a financial endurance test. It's the number one thing. Yes, other things come up, things like public services, immigration, but the number one thing, I mean, people are just finding everyday life as a struggle. And I think he knows that and he recognises it. But can he make a difference? He's going to have to.
Well, Michael, you know, you tipped Ayesha for Chancellor, but I mean, it all depends on who he gets as Chancellor, really, doesn't it? Or does it?
It does, and it's entirely understandable. This is the widespread public concern, but there is a worry, and it was a worry that Rishi Sunak identified, which is that by concentrating on what people tell you, their worry about the cost of living and prices increasing, you are chasing a moving target, and that what you should really be doing as Prime Minister is thinking about fixing the economic fundamentals. And that means thinking about how can we get growth and, you know, improvement in people's wages overall. If you make the connection between the two, if you've got the policies that generate growth, then people will be able to deal with it. But if you spend your time trying to think of little tweaks here and there to tax, to benefits, to subsidies, then the problem is you're not concentrating on the central economic...
Well, he's not about the tweaks, though, is he? He's proposing something radical, we think, but we don't really know.
Well, I think he will come in with something sort of radical. I don't think you would come in... I don't know. I mean, none of us kind of know at the moment. But all I would say is that, look, Manchester is not the same as the whole of the country, but there has been really kind of good growth.
No, that is fair.
A lot of which he inherited, but he did win the trust of the private sector.
We all stand on the
He didn't screw it up.
Yeah, exactly. We stand on the shoulders of others, right? Howard Bernstein, Richard Lees, all of those sort of people, absolutely. But you're absolutely right. If he wasn't doing a good job, we'd all be like... And a lot of business people in that area have certainly said to me, and not all of them, you know, many of them conservative business people, saying he's run an administration which has been... And they were surprisingly pro-business, non-tribal, and bringing in a lot of investment into...
And a lot of Middle Eastern investment as well.
Well, quite. I mean, you know, from the Gulf, the success of Manchester City has also been the success of Manchester's regeneration. But there is a difference, as everyone's pointed out, between being the champion of a city who generates investment and being Prime Minister when there are tougher trade-offs. So I don't think it's... I think it's smart political communication to connect with people over the real difficulty that so many have. But I think the critically important thing is having someone who can command confidence of the markets, stabilise any fears, and then show how we're going to get the level of investment in the UK.
Right, so
that
not
Manchester
Ed
said.
Miliband as Chancellor, in your view?
I don't... He's a great man in many ways. He managed to attract talent when he was leader of the opposition to work for him, but I don't think he's the right person.
Who's your pick, apart from Ayesha?
I don't know, but I have a sneaking sense, funnily enough, that it may be another female Chancellor.
Interesting. Shabana Mahmood.
Possibly.
You heard it here first. What do you think to that?
I just don't know. I think
it is being talked about, Shabana.
But the other thing is, look, immigration is a huge issue as well. You know, she's sorted that now. Well, she hasn't. You know, she's started to sort
being
it.
facetious, you know.
And there's going to be a big rebellion. You know, there's a lot of people unhappy with the immigration plans coming down the track. So there's a big argument to actually keep somebody, you know, to keep her in her job there. But I mean, I honestly don't know. I don't know.
Well, we'll get you back, you know, obviously when we know who is in the Cabinet. We don't have that long to wait. I mean, a week longer or so. But we'll see if you're in the Cabinet as Chancellor, Ayesha. Thank you both very much for being on the sofa today. Before we go tonight, I want to show you this. Norway striker Erling Haaland taking home an unusual souvenir from the World Cup. Having posted footage of a stuffed raccoon holding a bottle of alcohol while still in the States, the striker was then spotted carrying it under his arm as he left the plane after landing back in Norway. As he said himself, "It followed me home." Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you very much to my sofa panel. Thank you two for watching.
Cathy, there's a very important bit of breaking news. There's a very important announcement because it's your birthday, and Michael and I have got you a few little gifts to mark this auspicious
House of Lord
occasion.
Oh God, I can't get up.
Happy birthday for working on your birthday as well.
Who put you up to this?
It was entirely us. Entirely us.
Was it really?
Entirely us, yeah.
No, it wasn't. Was it
you have a lot
team effort?
You're a team effort. You're very loved here, and they want to say happy birthday.
It's also my 25th wedding
anniversary. Oh my gosh, Michael was going to jump out of a cake singing happy birthday.